But yeah, if we could all give a warm welcome to Miss Manuel.
Roll it out the presentation. Easy for you to say, Randy. So welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I am especially for a number of reasons. One, I think you all are talking about fair housing, which is a really tough issue. It's been a tough issue nationally, and we're at the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. Wow, 50 years. And I want to talk a lot about that in just a second, just the how momentous that was, how far we've come, and how far we have to go. Before we get there, I want to say, you've got my bio, but I'll say that I am the Vice President for Knowledge, Impact, and Strategy at Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise is a large national kind of housing intermediary, and we are community partners of folks all across the country. So we work nationally with many folks across the country like you, who are trying to think about how you can improve housing for folks who live in this community, for folks at all stations, right? We put about $9 billion of capital in communities across the country to try and help folks get what they need in terms of affordable housing. We provide policy assistance and data and technology and all the kind of things that we can think of to be good community partners. And one of the other things I think that's interesting is Enterprise was founded by Jim Rouse, and our headquarters is in Columbia. How many of you know anything about Jim Rouse? I wouldn't think you would, but Jim Rouse founded what used to be called the Enterprise Foundation in a community called Columbia, Maryland. Columbia, Maryland was his creation. He created Columbia, Maryland in the 60s. He decided that there was a whole lot of stuff going on in the world. People didn't know how to create communities where people lived together in harmony across race and income lines. And so he was a very wealthy real estate developer. And he decided he was going to create that community. So he basically bought enough acreage in Maryland for an entire city. How many folks can afford to do that, all right? But then he decided that, and it's funny, he brought all the sort of nations, thought leaders together. So we're going to create a community of folks who can live together in harmony, all different incomes, educational levels, et cetera. Tell me how to do it. And so from all over the country, just, the kind of the best and brightest minds, the bankers, the developers, the community folk, just, clergy, everybody. And they got together and started fighting. Okay. So he stepped back and he said, okay, so stop. Second day, okay, listen, you guys, you aren't being very helpful to me right now. Let's come back again tomorrow. Let's try it again. And they came back, and second day, they started fighting. Right? They couldn't figure out how to organize it and what you need and how you could put it together. And he is a funny thing. He was a very religious man. And he stepped back and he said, I just feel like y'all are not operating from the right way to think about this. This is not about how we figure out tax credit deals and this is about love. What I'm trying to figure out how to do is how we figure out how to help folks live in a community in which they belong, in which they're loved. That's what this is. And when you operate from that vantage point, we should be able to get up and over the logistics of tactics of how we get there. But y'all are operating from them. And they sort of stepped back and they looked at him like, this guy's crazy. He's really crazy. He's got a lot of money. He's crazy. But so I would say through a lot of wrangle, there are lots of books written about Jim Rouse, but they got through it. And what I want to say about that is I live in Columbia, Maryland today. It is a planned, quote unquote, community where every part of that community was planned for the vantage point of how do you get folks really in a space where they have what they need, bike paths and walking trails and different villages with different kind of characteristics. He was building in the 60s, and he wanted all different incomes to live together. So you got these sort of jumbo mansions next to, single-family homes that are sort of moderate, next to sort of starter homes, next to rental property, all in the same neighborhood. He sort of recreated the tax base so that there was a whole set of amenities that would go of general fund that would be for funding a whole series of things like gyms, playgrounds, education. Every community has a swimming pool. And that was a particular significance. He wanted to do that because in the 60s there was a conversation about a national conversation. Actually, it wasn't a conversation, it was a little bit of a travesty, in which there were a lot of racial issues at swimming pools, where folks didn't want to go swimming with people of color. And so there were these things, there were these sort of tensions that were raising across communities as swimming pools started to desegregate and some of these issues started to happen. And he said, you know what, we're going to have a swimming pool in every community so that every person in that community can have a place to go, right? And so he was being very thoughtful. Even things like there's mailboxes. There's not a mailbox on one house in the entire community. He created a centralized mailbox at the end of every block because he said, at the end of the day, when people go get their mail, I want them to gather together. I want to give them an excuse to meet people in the neighborhood and say hello. Hey, Jim, how you doing? Hey, Mary, how you doing? So I could talk ad infinitum about that, but what he was trying to do was to figure out how to bring diverse groups of folks together. He told developers who wanted to develop in the neighborhood, you will not have restrictive covenants here about who can live here in terms of racial and ethnic lines. Everybody is welcome here. And he put that out. And so even today, Columbia is an incredibly diverse place, not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but in income brackets. Every income, right, is in that, from the very wealthy to the folks who are really struggling and everything in between. So I just give that as an example. Not every community can start from scratch and just kind of like, right, get a bunch of land and say we're going to buy a city and create the thing that we want. A lot of us are working within the context of what we got, right? Right? You're looking at your city, Columbia, Missouri, and you're saying, you know, we got a whole lot of things here. How can we work within the context of what we have? And I hope that your intention as you sit here tonight is to think about how you operate. I know it's a little wonky. I know it's late. But how you operate from the vantage point of love and how you bring together folks who may not even see that they have things in common from the vantage point of being able to create not just affordable housing, housing is important, but how you create communities where people thrive. So I had a video, a whole series of things I was going to show you, but we're going to roll with it. So my work is really at Enterprise as the Vice President of Knowledge, Impact, and Strategy is helping communities all across the country not just do the sort of to figure out the tactics of how you build tax credit deals and how you put together community land trusts and how you sort of figure out the pieces. We got a lot of very smart people across the country and many of the smart people in your communities who are figuring that piece out. My role is different. My role in the organization is to help communities across the country make a case for that to other folks. How do you engage other folks? Housing is a huge issue, and yet, right, if you think about how important housing is to everything you do, it confers your access to transit, your access to good schools, your access to jobs, to some extent your access to credit. Basically, we know that where you live shapes your outcomes, not just for today, but now we have enough data to track it 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Wow, that's powerful. When I can drill down to every neighborhood and tell you the likelihood that a child who grows up in that neighborhood, given what is there, right, their likelihood that they'll have success later in life, that gives us an awesome responsibility, especially for those places where we know today they ain't got a shot. Right? And there are lots of places, not just here in Columbia, but across the United States where a whole lot of kids don't even have, starting out in life and they don't even have a shot. Right? There are a whole lot of that. So we have the data to reflect that. In fact, I was going to show you a little bit of Opportunity 360. One of the things we put out as an organization is a nationwide database where you can put in any address in the country, and it will spit out at you a 30-page report. I'll make sure that Randy has the information to share with you all, but a 30-page report of what opportunity looks like in that neighborhood. What's the likelihood that a kid grows up in this neighborhood, right, and gets to make a decent wage, right, in the future? What's housing look like? What's education look like, right? Is this a neighborhood where kids are, the number of kids that are going to school in the morning? Is this a neighborhood where there are more seniors? Whatever that is, a 30-page report down to the neighborhood level, and it compares every neighborhood in the country to every neighborhood in the country to every other neighborhood in the region. So if you want to move across the sort of broader Columbia region, compares that neighborhood to every neighborhood in the state, and then compares it to every other neighborhood in the nation. So if you want to know where you are, right, in terms of shaping opportunity outcomes, you can get that. So my role is in part, data is great, but we also know that data is only one small part of the equation. When you have to go out and you got to engage your neighbors and get them involved in the conversation here, not only just fair housing, but housing overall, how do you do it? And housing is tough. Housing is a tough issue, despite the fact that we know, all of us, we know how important it is. It's a tough issue to get people involved in, right? People will say on one hand, we have lots of places, they will say, I agree with affordable housing, we need more of that. And in some places, I'm sure in this region, when you say you're going to build some affordable housing at the end of their block, when you say you want to build a place, permanent supportive housing for folks who may have experienced homelessness at one point in their lives, and you want to build it at the end of their block, when you say you want to build a place for families who might have been struggling, and you want to build it at the end of their block, yeah, then it becomes a different kind of conversation. How many of you already know that? In addition to that, when we look nationally, when we look at where housing ranks in terms of people's policy priorities, when you ask people nationally, and there have been a number of policy organizations that regularly rank this. So, for example, the Gallup does a nightly poll where they ask people essentially, what are the things you think policymakers should be working on? How many of you think housing appears in the top 5? Raise your hand. Top 5, housing. Work on housing. Raise mine. Don't be ashamed. Not in the top 5. How many would say top 10? Raise your hand. Not in the top 5. It's got to be top 10, right? Raise your hand high. Don't be shy. For folks in the top 5, raise them again so we can see. Keep going. Top 15. Okay, it's got to be in the top 15, right? Okay, come on, raise your hand. Top 15, you think housing? Top 20? Come on now, top 20. Okay, most of you bid on that one. So what I would say is no. But here's what does happen. Around 19 or 20, to some extent, you get people identifying homelessness as an issue, but not housing. Right? So the visible aspects of having housing instability, which shows up as people experiencing homelessness, is something people can identify, but they don't mention housing. And here's the thing, so we know that what folks might call the social contract is changing. How many of you, and I know some of you are probably my age and over, so you remember the time when you could get a decent job in the school system, or you could get a good job even as a mechanic, or somebody's working in a hospital. You worked that job, you could save a little bit, saving up enough for down payment for a house and own a house, and then over time you could actually afford to take a trip and go on vacation. You remember that when that used to be possible? How many of you remember that when that used to be possible? Okay, well, not so much anymore. The social contract is changing. We had an expectation that if we worked hard and you got a decent job, even if it was a good working class blue collar job, you could, right? My family's from Detroit, Michigan originally, and all my uncles worked for the auto industry, and you could get a job working in the factory, and you could own a little piece of land, a decent house, and on the weekends have a barbecue in the backyard with one job. Well, that's not possible for a widening group of folks across the country. A lot of folks are working 2 jobs and more jobs. In fact, when we talk about housing for low-income families, a part of the challenge for middle-class families, they say, wait a minute, you're talking about low-income families and how they're 1 paycheck away from disaster. I'm middle class, and I'm about 2 paychecks. We know nationally, if you just do the numbers, most middle-class families are 2 paychecks away from disaster. How many of you in this room, if you lost your job and within essentially 2 paychecks, would be in trouble? And it would be, right? You might, figure out a way to cobble, but it would be a struggle. So the part of the challenge for us, especially in the affordable housing space, is when we go out and we say we need some additional resources to help folks who need affordable housing, right? Who are up to 80% of AMI or area median income. I say, man, I don't. What about me, right? So as we think about housing as a larger issue and concern, it's very difficult for folks to see themselves as part of the movement that we're building, right? One, because they don't see themselves in terms of the income categories in which we're building for. But a part of it is, right, they may not even see this as an issue that is relevant to them. They see housing concerns as folks who are homeless versus folks who are struggling, some for 2 and 3 jobs to be able to pay for their mortgages and their rents. So this is a bigger issue that we're having, where there is some difficulty in how we engage wider audiences in our community about the importance of this. And that's astounding to me that we struggle so hard to do that. When you think about the fact that in 2008 and 2009, housing as an issue brought this economy to its knees. In fact, it brought the world economy to its knees. Y'all remember that? Literally, the world economy broke down because our housing stuff wasn't in order. Our housing was not in order. And interestingly enough, we're finding ourselves back in that circumstance again, where we don't have the housing we need in every single market in the country, right? Housing is a huge issue. And we're having trouble getting Americans to even see it. We ask them, we're not even top 5, top 10, top 15, not even in the top 20. And this is the thing that brought the U.S. economy to its knees a decade ago. So so I got good news and bad news. Let's see, which one do you want first? I got both of them. Good news, want the good news first? Okay, all right. How about we go back and forth? I give you a little good news, I give you some bad news, I give you some more good news. How about that? So I will say, so there's a lot of good news. I think a part of the good news is that we've come a long way in a number of issues. So let's start the conversation where we were before, which is in fair housing. In 1968, when the Fair Housing Act was passed, it did not pass because Americans woke up one day and said, oh, you know what? We have all these restrictive covenants keeping lots of folks, including people of color, out of houses, and we need to figure out a way to equalize access to housing. You know what? Let's do that. Let's as Americans embrace that and do that. Anybody know the reason why the Fair Housing Act actually passed? 1968. Who said that? I heard somebody say it. Say it louder. I can't see who's saying it. Say it again. Somebody said it over here. Okay, yes, Martin Luther King. So there are there's civil rights legislation that had passed in 1964, the Civil Rights Act, and that gave us access to public accommodations. We could eat together in restaurants. We could live together. We could sleep together in hotels, or not sleep together. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. It's late. You know what I'm saying. But we could go to hotels together. We could go to movies together. But the thing that could not go, the thing that congressional policymakers could not get past, was housing. Think about that. You can do all kinds of things. We could figure out ways to the Civil Rights Act to move, but not housing. I'll go to the movies with you, and you stay over there, but I won't live next to you. I won't have your kids playing with my kids. I won't, right? That was huge. And the thing that made that pass was the assassination of Martin Luther King. Martin King died, and 10 days later, the Congress that had been debating fair housing for many years with no real effort passed. And again, it was interesting about that. I'll give you a little history lesson. Not because even policymakers said, hey, we ought to do something. Martin Luther King has been assassinated. We ought to do something to sort of say to the nation, we're going to address this issue of racial unrest. It was because Martin Luther King was assassinated, and there were 125 cities across the United States that were burning because of the riots. Literally. Burning. People were so enraged. How many of y'all remember that? Some of y'all are old enough to remember. Okay. 125 cities were burning. And congressional policymakers, even the ones that were really against this notion of fair housing, said, we got to do something. To just say something about the fact that, right, we have to address some of these issues of racial hate. We have to do something. Otherwise, right, we're not going to be able to make people go home and stop. I mean, think about that. Detroit was burning. Chicago was burning. Cleveland was burning. Probably St. Louis and many other places in Missouri burning. L.A. was burning. Seattle was burning. Austin, Texas was burning, right? New York was burning. I mean, really, imagine the scale of that today. Think about that, the scale of that. Wow. And it took that, right, to have us lean into something as simple as people ought to have the right to have access to housing, no matter who they are. Love, right? We ought to be able to live next to each other and, right, not have that be a problem. Wow. So here's the good news. Not just that we passed that, but when you poll Americans today after more than 50 years, most Americans agree with that. And back then they didn't. But when you ask people, like, what are the kind of things that would violate fair housing, Americans can tell you right away, yep, that's not fair, that's unjust. We still have trouble sort of living into that fully, but Americans overall have embraced this idea over time, right, that we ought to be able to all live in the same place, and the barriers to being able to do that should be moved. Isn't that awesome? Let's just take a minute. Man, let's just live in that for just a second. That's some really good news. We've come a long way. We got a long way to go, and I know that locally you're working on fair housing. Keep going, because our work is not done. But it means that we've got some good news there. The second thing I'd say that's really, really, really good news for us is that, and this is going to sound kind of interesting as I say this, but that this is good news, we have a national housing crisis. I know that may not sound like good news, right? But to some extent it is, because we are in a position again where we have an opportunity to address this issue of housing again. We had this in 2008 and 2009 and we missed the opportunity, right? To have a real conversation about what housing is. Y'all remember in 2008 when the sort of larger crisis happened, there were a whole bunch of stories about the Lehman Brothers and bad management and subprime mortgages, and it became a story about mismanagement of financial wheelers and dealers. It wasn't about people. It wasn't about our ability to afford the places we live or the communities we wanted to create. It became a story about people financing or people buying too much home. That was not the narrative that would help us advance what we need. But guess what? Through no fault of our own, we got another bite at the apple. We have a national housing crisis, and I don't know if you've been paying attention, but every major newspaper in the country is talking about this. The Wall Street Journal, front page stories. This is a problem for the titans of industry who have figured out that they cannot operate their businesses effectively without addressing this issue of housing. All of a sudden, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, right, arguably probably the richest man in America, and he's going to own all of our homes eventually, I suppose, is $150 million, right, for homelessness in Seattle, about to land in Virginia, talking explicitly to housing advocates because of this issue. I was doing a focus group in Virginia just last week, and they were like, we got to get more of these billionaires involved. But it's true. The Facebook billionaires, they're all involved. Facebook, $200 million, $300 million. And a part of what's happening in Seattle and California is extreme, but all across the country, Bloomberg, others, because they've recognized they can't operate their businesses when their workforce can't afford a place to live, right? Even where even locally in Baltimore, a little bit up the road from where I am in Columbia, a lot of the basic businesses, a new casino, regardless of how you think of casinos, big casino opened up, it's a big fanfare, can't get a workforce. Why? Because the people they need to work there can't get there on time because they live so far out of the city, right? They can't get to work on time. So now they got to figure out what to do about what? Housing. So all of a sudden, we got a shot at this. Nationally, there is a crisis brewing, and the titans of industry, the folks who normally would not be so bothered as to think about issues of affordable housing, this would not be on their radar screen. All of a sudden, this is important conversation to be having. Wow, this is the moment, right? So in your community, this is the moment. Right, the very economic structure of what's happening in Columbia, Missouri is changing. This is the moment to have the conversation around who can live here, what does it take to live here, right, and how we make sure that people, no matter their station in life, have some access to the places here. And not just the shabby stuff, but have a decent place to live because of the opportunity that confers to them. Man, that's good news, don't you think so? I think so. Okay, can I give you a little bit of bad news? Can I give you a little bit of bad news? I'll be gentle. So a part of the bad news is that, there's lots of bad news, but I'll just give you the basic stuff. A part of the bad news is that the way that most people think about housing as an issue is, it often conflicts with what we're trying to do. That is to say, and then we've done significant amounts of research on this at Enterprise. I'm a social scientist. I studied this and talked to people all over the country, which I love. When you talk to folks about what's happening, they don't think about housing in the same way they think about other social issues. In other words, people don't think about this as a social issue. They don't think about this as the social issue of our time, right? So when you think about education, people think that, we owe each other, right, a basic education. So I may not know you, or you, but I know that we are all better when we provide an educational system that at least gives some basic education for our young people. So we owe each other that. There's a strong sense about that. Even healthcare. We don't have a nationalized healthcare system in this country, but there's a strong belief among most Americans anywhere you go that we owe each other a little bit of healthcare. So if you fall out in the middle of that little carpet right there, let's hope nobody does. This is an exciting moment, but let's not make it that exciting. But if you're somehow and you fall right there, right, you have a right to basic health care. People, the ambulance will come. They won't ask you till maybe tomorrow about your health insurance, but they'll take care of you. They'll take you to the hospital. That at the most basic level, we agree that we ought to be, right, have a basic, health care system that at least accommodates emergency situations. We won't take you all the way through to what you need to do later, but at least if you fall out, we got you. And a whole range of other transportation. I don't build roads, you don't, but we have a basic responsibility, a sort of collective responsibility, and a sense of that to each other that will help each other to build the roads and things that we need. When we talk to Americans all across the country about housing as an issue, they don't see it that way. They talk about housing as a reward for getting a good education. Then you work a job, you save, right? And then you get access to the house you want. Then you take your paycheck and you figure out what you can afford on that money. And if you can't, all over the country, this is really interesting, all over the country people say, if you look at your paycheck and you can't afford something really nice in Columbia, you got to move. The primary narrative around affordable housing, and a part of the obstacle for us, is the narrative of mobility. Whether you're in Missouri, and it's amazing, whether you're in Missouri, whether you're in Kansas, whether you're in Chicago or Detroit. And I would say, one of the ways you test this, if you go and just Google affordable housing and you go to news feed and just look at the news online around affordable housing, and just pick any article, doesn't matter, and then go to the comment section. In fact, a lot of newspapers have taken the comment section off. They don't even allow you to comment because the stuff is. But the reason I think that's useful is because the comment section is one of the few places where you can get people's actual, honest opinions about a whole range of things. Because we've learned to be very polite to each other, right? When we talk to each other, we've been socialized. There's some things you just can't say in public to people. But then you go home in your living room and you say all kind of things, right? But in the comment section, because it's anonymous, people say the things they really feel that you never get a chance to hear, right, when they're face-to-face with you and they don't want to have, right, those sensitive conversations. So when you go to the comment section over and over and over again, what you see people talking about is, listen, if you can't, you have to move. It's not my responsibility to subsidize somebody. Hey, I'm struggling too. If you can't afford the house that you live in, you got to go someplace else. You got to get yourself a better education. You got to get yourself a better job, or you got to move. There are places you can go. If Columbia is too expensive, maybe you can go to Kansas. I mean, I think, or Alaska, they have good jobs there, I think. They have houses there. And no, they really say this over and over and over again. And what's interesting about what I study as a social scientist is how it's not just that conversation happens in one place. Like if it was just in Chicago that they said that, that'll be one thing. But all over the country, there's a narrative about who we are and about how we respond to this as an issue that's built around housing as a consumer good, that it's a reward, right, for other good decisions that you made, not that you have as a human being should have access to a decent place to live. That's a little bit of a problem for us because it means that we don't feel like we owe each other that. I don't feel like I owe you that, right? And so if we're trying to build a broader community sense that this is something we should be working on, the first issue is you got to get up and over this notion of consumerism, right? People think when you think of housing, they think HGTV. Yeah, you got to put in the new granite countertops and, right? They don't think, right, about the basic issue that lots of folks can't afford it, and we're struggling to do that. So a part of the challenge for us is getting people up and over this notion about housing as something that is a consumer good, like the same thing that you would do if you were going to buy a car, right? You look at your paycheck, right, and you say, okay, this is what I have to offer, and you go to the dealership and you say, okay, that's my paycheck. What can I afford? Right? Because a lot of folks, and that's the way that a lot of folks think about this issue. In a whole bunch of research, I'll make sure that Randy send this out for those of you who'd like it. We looked at that consistently across the country. What are the narratives around housing that are making it more difficult to engage our neighbors? When you want to walk this out to average everyday folks, what are the things that come back at you that make this a difficult conversation to have and sometimes make our conversations backfire? That narrative of mobility is a huge one. The sort of narrative around individual responsibility. It's your responsibility. You take care of you, I'll take care of me. Everybody's good. But the moment you ask me to do something, wait a minute now. You want my tax dollars to go do what? For you? And I don't even know you and I'm struggling? Oh boy. And we know a lot about that when people have a sense that there's we call the sort of the mentality of scarcity, right? Think about that when people are already feeling like they all have some economic anxiety around their own issues, right? When folks are feeling like they're within 1 or 2 paychecks of their own challenges, they don't open up and say, wow, I'm really struggling. I got a kid on my couch who has got, $100,000 of student loan debt and no job, and I got my own mom. I'm trying to figure out how to get my mom and I'm thinking about my own sort of pension. They don't say, in that context, let me figure out somebody else's housing circumstances. Let me figure out how to make housing available to all. What do people do when they have a scarcity mindset? Go down. They start trying to figure out how to keep what little bit they got. So when you say to your neighbors across Columbia, hey, we can figure this out, right? There are a lot of folks who are struggling. Let's figure out a way to make sure they have. People go, but I'm struggling, right? So part of the conversation part of the thing that makes this a difficult thing is that people are operating from the vantage point of this as a consumer good. They're operating out of a scarcity mindset, which sometimes makes it difficult to engage folks. So the good news is you all are here. We're going back to the good news. You want to go back to the good news? Okay. The good news is there are ways to get people, right, to get people out of that mindset. And it's your responsibility, and one of the reasons you're here tonight is to begin to help us do that. Like, how do you begin to grow a sort of sense that something else is possible in Columbia, right? That we can put love back in the center and figure out a way to make sure our neighbors have what they need and their kids have an opportunity to grow and thrive the same way we want our own children to grow and thrive. Y'all ready to learn how to do that? Some strategies for how to do that? Okay, all right. So the first thing is, and I often talk to folks about this, when we are trying to engage our neighbors, there's a lot of just cynicism about what we can do together. Y'all know that? Just a lot of people, you can't do that. You're going to do something, and right, the policymakers, they won't. In fact, I do focus groups and things all over the country with groups trying to talk to folks about some of these issues and listening, right, for ways to engage folks better and differently. And folks consistently, I don't know. In fact, let me just give an example. In Virginia, where Amazon is about to land their new headquarters, so the policymakers are like, yes, we just landed the new headquarters of Amazon. And overnight, real estate prices in that community, Northern Virginia, which were already soaring and through the roof, which poor folks are being priced out consistently. Overnight, right, folks who even had real estate deals that were on the table, they were about to close, right? Folks said, no, I'm going to wait, right? Because they know that's going to change the region. And so when I talk to folks, so the part of the conversation we're having with some of the folks in Virginia was, okay, so you got to get ready. You got to get in front of this. This is what's going to happen. And I had a group of several focus groups. So each focus, I wanted to see how much of a fight, how much of a sense of, we can do something about this to actually preserve, right, the character of the communities that are here. How much of that was there? And so I said, there are 10 of you around the room. I need a couple of these successfully, but here's an example. There are 10 of you around the room. If you know anything about when tech companies land in various places like Northern Virginia, what usually happens is, if there are 10 of you around the room, 8 of you are going to get priced out. 5 years from now, 8 of you will not be in this community. Some of you because you're going to be priced out because you don't own your homes, and some of you because you're going to sell, right? Because you're going to get a nice equity paycheck and leave the neighborhood. But the value of you're going to be priced out. What do you think about that? And I wanted to make this a real personal experience, so I said, where are you going to go when you get priced out? And it was amazing to me as we went around the room, the resignation. It was absolutely, because I wanted to see is there a fight here? Is there a sense of there are things that we can do, like community land trusts, all kinds of things you can do, right? And some say, I'm struggling. I guess I'll go further down south to Richmond. I guess I'll see. And it was like one by one around the table, the resignation. of that. So part of the conversation, that a part of what I'm going to sort of say to you about what you're going to have to do, not because Amazon is coming, but because you all are getting in front of this, right? You're not waiting for an Amazon to come and right? Hopefully, in fact, I would say you don't want that, but some folks thought that was a big win. That's debatable. But so here's what I want to say. First of all, there's so much crisis, right, and negative stuff around us consistently. Right? Do y'all get that? When you turn on the news every day, there's so much crisis. There's so much negativity. There's so much, even just, this was Giving Tuesday, cause marketing, which is all supposed to be good. But how many charities were hitting your box? The American Heart Association, the Epilepsy Foundation, Humane Society, for the Save the Whale, Save the Dog, Save the Children, Save the blah, blah, blah. Wow, there's just so much. In addition to all the crazy stuff that's happening in the news every day, do we have Social Security, the terrorists, the Russians, the democracy in peril, the craziness and it's a lot. So when you engage people, and this is the challenge for us as housers especially, we often want to try and get people a sense of a call to action by giving all the negative information we can, because we think that's a call to action. So we say, this many people in Colombia don't have access to housing, and this many people in Colombia are homeless on any given night, and this many kids go without a decent meal, and this many kids, because we think what? That if people hear that, they'll say, oh, my gosh, we ought to do something about that. But what we know from a lot of good social science research is the opposite actually happens, right? The opposite happens, right? It feels so big and it's so negative that people hunker down. They don't want to hear it. They turn up, like they much rather, they are more interested in hearing about what Kim Kardashian had for breakfast than what's happening to their neighbors in Colombia, right? So our first lesson for tonight, we're going to talk about this in our small groups. We cannot go out with more negative stuff. If you go out with negative stuff, people shut down. They want to turn you off. They want to filter you out because you're another one of those folks telling them that the world is crazy and they don't have any control over it and they're scared and you're giving them that scarcity mindset. Oh boy. So a part of what we know actually works is to anchor people in solutions. Anchor people in what you want to provide. I was going to show you some examples in a whole range of other areas where people have done this really successfully. So one good example, the Kaboom folks. Anybody know Kaboom? The Kaboom folks? They build playgrounds all across the country. The real thing that they want to go after, or that they're trying to solve for, is childhood obesity. Right? We also have a national childhood obesity issue, and that's the issue that they're trying to solve for. But they don't go out and say, oh, my God, look at all the kids who are obese, and da-da-da, and they're going to all die of heart attacks, and right? Because there's a lot of really strong data about what happens, right? They start off by talking about playgrounds and how our kids don't have enough unrestricted playtime anymore. The schools are chopping down at playtime, and our kids don't have just opportunities to just play, to just go somewhere and just not be structured in any way, but just to let their imagination and their bodies wander, right? Playgrounds, they talk about how many they build. We build this many playgrounds, and here's what it costs, and here's what that's. Oh, and by the way, when we build playgrounds, it solves for a whole range of other stuff: childhood obesity, depression, all kinds of issues. They don't lead with the negative. They lead with what the solution is. They lead with what's possible. And the good news about that is when you do that, people walk away with, and they get anchored. It's what we call it anchoring. They get anchored in what's possible, right? So you got folks who normally wouldn't lean into a conversation about childhood obesity, leaning in, because playground, I can lean in, playground, we can build some playground. I was listening to this group they were talking about, right? So the challenge for you as you're thinking about housing is, what's the thing that helps people lean in, to get excited about what you're doing, to think that there's a possibility of something really wonderful happening here, not depressed because of all the folks who are losing their homes or being evicted or kids who don't have a decent place to, right? So that's our first challenge. The second thing is building a sense of we and why. Before, some of us, I would say, some of us lead with how many, that's our numbers, or what we do. Well, we build houses, we do this way, and we do, right? People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And they buy it when they see they have a stake in your why. For those of you who, I would encourage you to read a book by Simon Sinek. If you haven't read his book called Start With Why, you should listen to his TED Talk. Fabulous. And he just talks about cognitive science. People don't, right? Actually, Apple Watch, they don't sell you with, sell you a watch based on what the watch does. You all got to watch. The watch does the same thing your watch on the wrist does. Right? They sell you this fancy $400 version of the watch based on who you are and what's the bigger why and who you want to be. Right? That's what marketers do. They figure out who you want to be and they try to, you are technology savvy and you are blah, 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 blah. Like for them, that's their why. But for us, in terms of why are you doing this? The bigger why. Not because you know how to build a structure with 4 walls and you can do it, and it costs as much, but because you want a better future for your children. Because you want Columbia to be a place where people, no matter where you start in life, you got a shot at something bigger. You got a shot at success, that people who live here have a shot at some real opportunities. You may start off at the bagging groceries, but darn it, you got a shot at something bigger if you want it, if you live in this community. That's the why. People buy into the why, they don't buy into the what. So starting off that conversation, you're not starting off with negatives today. You're going to anchor people in solutions, and you're going to tell people why you want them to lean in. The bigger why, not the small why of what you do. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. The other piece is you got to position people as part of the story, as part of the conversation. A part of the thing that makes affordable housing really tough is that people don't see themselves in it. So you tell me a story about somebody who was formerly homeless, or somebody who's mom who's struggling, or a family who was formerly 4 who's struggling and they're struggling. If I'm, middle class, or I'm, I mean, what does that have to do with me? I'm struggling too, by the way, is what people will say. How does that relate to me? I don't know what to do with that. And if you tell me that you all are providing housing for those folks, I say, okay, great, keep doing it. But what does that have to do with me? What we know works is to position this issue. People put them inside the story. I like this. I say to folks all the time, if I'm not in your story, I'm not coming to your party. Right? That's the way that people think. If I'm not in it, I don't know what my role is. So you got to put average, everyday folks who don't think they have any relationship at all to housing, you got to put them in the story. Right? A group out of Chicago doing a bang-up job of this. Actually, a number of groups I could talk about. Chicago, they have a whole campaign that says, we need the people who need affordable housing. Not they need affordable housing. Not they. We need them. And they have a whole campaign asking people to think about all the folks in their lives who actually make their life and their lifestyles possible, and then to think about where they live. We need the people who need, not they, right? They've completely repositioned that conversation so people see themselves inside the story, and then talk about that, right? How is it? I mean, think about your own life. All the people in your life who make your lifestyle and what you need possible, and where they live, right? They've totally repositioned people as part of the story. See, she knows that. She's like, yep, I need to be inside the story. And repositioning that way also values the folks who are getting affordable housing. Sometimes we can stigmatize folks who need affordable housing. It also makes them feel valuable. So yes, right? You need me. I may be just a bagger at the grocery store, but yeah, you're saying to me, you need me. I belong to this community. I belong here too. I have a place here too. That's powerful. People who never saw themselves part of this story are now in it. And people who are already in it see themselves as being valuable, right, to folks who before were just kind of an afterthought. Wow. Repositioning people as part of the story in a different way is powerful. So one of the things I want you to imagine as we go down to our breakout groups is who needs to be in this conversation and they don't even know it, right? Who is impacted by this and they don't ever think about it. They don't ever stop to think about how their lives are impacted by this issue and why they should be deeply, deeply involved. And storytelling is powerful. I could do a whole session on that, but I won't. I won't, not tonight. The other thing I want to say is connecting the dots to folks. I'm going to give you another technique. You gotta connect this to other things. I already said talking about the why, which is bigger than just housing, but connect it to other things that you know people care about. Housing in and of itself feels very inanimate. It's housing for the sake of, right? It's 4 walls and a floor and a roof. But when you start to connect that to what housing actually means, people get it. For example, one of the folks on our board is Megan Sandell. She's a pediatrician. And she says, listen, I am a housing advocate. I'm a health provider, I'm a pediatrician, but I'm a housing advocate, and here's why. Because half the things that are showing up in my office, from kids especially, they're not showing up sick because they just, right, are sick kids. They're showing up because they have bad housing. Right? The kids who have asthma come here constantly because they're in places where they don't have good housing. But the problem is I can't write a prescription for decent housing because they don't sell that at the pharmacy. You can't take that to the pharmacist and say, I just need good housing. Give me a better place to live, and I won't have to show up at your hospital anymore. Right? So I want you, as you're thinking about those stories, to think about who can help you tell that story and how to connect it. The pediatricians in this community, ask them. The teachers who are looking in their classroom at kids who are unstably housed and saying, man, not only is my job harder, right, because I got kids who are not doing poorly because they just are dumb. No kid is dumb. But they're doing poorly because they have no place to study. They're doing poorly because their families are in transition constantly. You solve that, and you solve for a whole range of issues that I'm looking at. You want me to be a better teacher? I'd love to. Solve housing. Right? You want me to be a better physician and keep kids out of the hospital? Solve housing. Right? A whole range of folks who right now are not giving voice to this issue should be giving voice to this issue. So I want you to think about all the folks, not just who are individually affected, as we talked about before, but even the folks across sector that you can connect this to. I'm going to say 2 more things, and then I'm going to sort of close out our general presentation for tonight. I want to say one of the other issues, especially as we think about 2 things, particularly about fair housing. One is this issue of equity, and especially racial equity is still an issue that we have to address. I want to say something about that. But I also want to say something about this issue of thinking about the past and how we address sort of the past issues in several ways. So first of all, I want to say you have to have a conversation about equity. And there are lots of equity. There's racial equity issues. There's an economic issue. You have to have a conversation about the fact that not all people are experiencing housing in the exact same way, and that there are issues in this community and across the country that are really tough. Right? You have to have a conversation about folks who are not. It's not just general housing, but why is it that, right, some folks are experiencing a harder time? You got to be courageous enough to have a conversation. And I know race is hard. Race is we in this country. It's hard. It was hard in 1968, right? Where you had, and it's still hard today. But you got to have that conversation. You got to put it on the table, right? And I would say that for 2 reasons. One, because you can't solve the affordable housing issue without having a conversation about race. Because when people think about affordable housing, they often think about people of color. They align the 2, even when they don't say it. If you don't address it, it's like the elephant in the room that just never gets, there's not a conversation. You got to address it, right? But also, for all those folks who are thinking about racial equity issues, if you don't talk about housing, you can't address it, because housing is central to the way that people build wealth. So if you're thinking about the racial wealth, you can't solve it without talking about housing. So from the vantage point of these conversations, I want you to be in your group thinking about how do we address that in a very sensitive and thoughtful way. As people who are centering and coming from a place of love. Be Rousean today. Jim Rouse said, I don't care, we're going to have a swimming pool in every community because I know I want everybody to feel like they belong to this place. What does it mean to have everybody feel like they belong here? No matter what race or ethnicity they are, no matter where they come from, no matter how they got here, they belong here. How do you talk about those issues? How do you begin those, right? I'm less concerned about the how and more concerned about the fact that you do, right? And start slowly. You don't have to go out and sort of, shout at the rooftops, but have that conversation. Bring it into how do we make everybody feel like they're welcome in this community and address some of those issues that are challenging. And the last thing I would say is around this, particularly around this issue of equity, is you've got to put people in the future, right? A part of the equity issues that are really tough is in this community and probably every community across the country, there's some tough issues that have happened in the past. If you go too far back in the past, people get really upset. So, for example, Randy and I we were driving around today, and we were just talking about some of the issues in Columbia, and historically urban renewal kind of raised some communities of color, and that has been a challenge in the past. Acknowledge that, but I will say that if you land there and if you languish there too long, right, you'll get people upset about what happened in the past. A part of what makes people aspirational about what you're doing is when you put them in the future. As social scientists, we call it future pacing. Put people in the future. Ask people to think about, what is Columbia going to look like in 5 years? What does that look like? What do you want it to look like? And we're not just doing that because we want people to have imagine and vision, right? But psychologically, there is something that helps people to get up and over the challenges of today. Like, think about it when you're looking when you're in your car. When you look in the rearview mirror and you're looking backward, the world seems so small because you got that little mirror. But when you look out in front of you, the horizon is large. It's bright. It's wide. You could go anywhere. You could do anything. When people look toward the future, there's a way in which they feel like the future is something we can create together. People will say, I can't solve what happened yesterday. I don't know what happened when urban renewal came and this happened in Columbia, and then those people didn't like those people, and then these people had a fight, and then I don't know. I can't solve that. But the future is something that we can create together. And people lean into that, and they can get aspirational about that. And I tell you what, there are all kinds of ways, that people sometimes don't anticipate the power of what it means for people to be looking at their future. Sometimes when I'm moderating focus groups, I say, what do you love about this community? What is the thing you want to take into the future? What do you love about, why do you live here? You could live any place in the world. What do you love about Columbia? What's fantastic, and what do you want to survive and last right into the future? And the reason I do that is not because I just want to know about that. I think if you go to most places, the answers will literally be the same. Oh, I was born here, I like it, whatever. The reason I do that is because when people transport themselves into that future, you can feel the energy in the room change when that happens. Sometimes to illustrate that, I give the story that I had just gotten my PhD, and I got a job my first job out of graduate school. I got a job at the University of North Carolina teaching as a professor in political science. And I had just finished school, and this was back in the day when you could actually go to graduate school, graduate with no debt, right, and it's not possible today, but this was back in some of the good old days when you could actually go to school, right, get paid to do that, and actually can't do that today. But I graduated with no debt. I was excited about my life. I bought my own home, and this was great. And I went to the car dealership because I was getting my first little car, and I was so excited. I get to the dealership, and the salesperson is, showing me some cars, and I see this little red convertible in the corner. I'm like, ooh, I can't afford that. And the guy said, oh, you like that? Come on, just look at it for a second. No, I can't. That's something. He said, no, come on and sit in the car. So I said, okay, I'll just look at it, because I literally had never seen or been in a convertible. How many of you have been inside a convertible? Okay, see, I had never been in a convertible, so I said, okay, look, so I got inside the car. Wow, this is really nice, and he's showing me how the roof comes up and down, and it's this really dramatic thing, like the back opens up and like the thing comes out, and it's like all this, like, woo, look at that. And then he says, okay. So put your hands on the wheel and feel the leather. I'm like, ooh, nice. And then he says, now look in front of you. Imagine of a day, like 6 o'clock. The sun is going down over the horizon. Look, you're on the highway. There's no cars, no traffic. Driving down the highway. Hair's blowing in the wind. Imagine what you feel. Got your tunes going, and I'm all into that. And just And I just want to say that when I drove out of that dealership in that red convertible, my hair was blowing in the wind, and I had it going. But I just say that to say that when you get people to envision themselves in front of where they are today, not today, but just in front, You allow them to envision themselves differently. You get them all. I mean, literally, you could just feel the energy change. And so as you all are thinking about how you engage your neighbors, your friends, your family, your policymakers, your city council, your mayor, the future, give them that future orientation. This is what we see in the future. This is the Columbia we're building together. This is the reality of what we want for our kids. This is what we want to preserve about Columbia, right, for the next generation. This is what we're excited about. That gets people to lean in, right, and say, we need to be working on that because, man, these folks are doing that's the thing I want. That's the thing that makes me feel like I have a stake in your success. So I want to just stop there. I want to say that we have an awesome moment. You got some of the most competent folks. I was driving around today at just some of what's and just looking at some of what's happening here in Columbia. You got some of the most competent folks in housing. I mean, doing community land trust is tough work. Communities are struggling across the country to figure out how to make that happen. They're struggling trying to figure out how to do rad deals and all the other things that are happening in your community. Y'all are figuring it out, and you're figuring it out without a whole lot of acrimony. Lots of communities, they're fighting it out, and I'm talking duking it out, right, at every city council meeting. They are fighting, right, hard. And you guys have got goodwill, you've got great people with expertise, and you got a moment, right? You got a moment where something big and awesome is possible. So as you go out, right, anchor them in the solutions. Don't start with that negative stuff. Give them this is what's possible. Tell them about the why, the bigger why you're in this, right? Build a bigger story of us. Put them inside the story so they see themselves in it. It's not just about those people over there or that community over there, but they see themselves inside of it. They see themselves connected to it, right? Talk about the equity issues. There are lots of us who, are experiencing this very differently. We have to make sure that everybody feels like they belong here for real. Not just we're saying that, but for real, they belong here in this community and they got a shot. And then put them in the future. Make them aspirational. Have them lean in because they're leaning into a vision that puts them in the future. So I want to make sure y'all going to do that. Y'all with me? Y'all going to do that? All right. So the next part of this is to figure out together how we begin to have those conversations. Let's do it.